I'm Nicole Kelly. I'm a recovered alcoholic. And thanks to, God, the 12 steps, and really good sponsorship, I've been sober since January 23rd, 1999. And, I was taught to dress. This is a privilege and an honor. And I thank Cade for calling and asking me. I promise you, when I was in college and I was asked to speak, I stood at the podium. I looked at everybody and I said, I'll take my F and I'll sit down. And so even today, after all of these years, there's still a level of fear and anxiety in doing this. The difference is, when I was there, it was fear of other people's opinions and fear of not being good enough. And today, it's the fear of the importance of what this is. It's the level of responsibility that I have to, share my, as we say, experience, strength, and hope. And it tells me in a general way, right? What happened, what it was like, and where I'm at today. So, where I started, I grew up in a lot of dysfunction, a lot of trauma and drama. I mean, the easiest way to tell you is my father had 3 best friends. He had the town drunk, he had the drug dealer, and the pedophile. That was my childhood. So by the time I was 5, I knew how to weigh, separate, and bag, and I knew how to do the drug trade. I knew the bar, I knew the bar scene, I knew, the people that were there, the women my father liked to take home, and I also, knew where to hide, and as well as the fact that I didn't know how to hide well enough. Alcohol was readily available. My dad thought it was funny that I would get my own little 6-pack of pony beers. I don't know if anybody's, some of you might not be old enough to know what those are. But we would fishbowl, the Volkswagen Bug. My parents were hippies. And I grew up on Cape Cod, Massachusetts, a little beach town, beach community. And, there wasn't a lot to do there but drink. And, and I pursued it. By the time I was 11, I was drinking around the clock. I know that sounds crazy to people, but it's just, that's where I was at. That was my world. I was the little kid burning smiley faces into my arm with, a lighter, because I thought that was cool. I was skipping school and drinking. And life was very painful. I went to my first funeral for alcohol-related death before I was 12. I, passed out on my back, and my mother rolled me into my own vomit because I was asphyxiating. It's you would think that at that age, right? It's sad because I have my own children, and I've seen them at those ages, right? And they are children, little babies. And I was all grown up at that point already. By the time I was hitting high school, I had been sent to alternative high school. I did not fit in with general society. We would go to the local 7-Eleven, which is, I guess, a convenience store. I don't know, do you have 7-Elevens here in Texas? Local convenience store, buy a bottle of No-Dos that would get us to school. And then we would go in the plumbing shop and start smoking pot. And then we would go in the carpentry shop and drink. And then we would go down to the auto body shop and get a couple of hits of acid. And then we would get on the bus to go home. And then we would drink. And this is what we did, And, I think I was 14. And I was getting off the bus with my best friend, and these guys were walking from the parking lot, which meant they had a car, so they were really cool. He had a mohawk, he had a leather jacket, he had ripped up jeans, and I was like, oh my God, who is that? That is what I want to bring home to my parents. And, come to find out, that was who we bought our drugs from, so I was doubly in love. And again, dating for me was taking a hostage. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that. But we were a match made in heaven, right? So we drank, we did a lot of drugs, we did a lot of crazy ass things. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Sex Pistols, right? We were into like the whole alternative scene, and everybody was like, they called us Sid and Nancy. And to be completely honest with you, that was something I could get behind, right? Sex, drugs, and suicide. I was like, sign me up, right? And at 15, I found myself pregnant. And, you know, I'm a young girl, I'm a sophomore in high school, and I'm pregnant, and my boyfriend's job is a drug dealer, and he's getting expelled from his third high school. And I had an epiphany that this child was going to be what saved me, right? And so, you know, Mark and I had this, and I know you're familiar with my husband, we had this brilliant conversation that we were going to stop doing drugs and only drink, because drinking was not a problem. If you just drank, life would be good. And so that was, you know, we proceeded, right? We had our son. We drank in the hospital. We had him christened. We had a keg party for the christening, right? This is what everybody does, right? This is normal behavior, right? I mean, I don't know. In this kind of a room, people, you know, identify with me, but, you know, when I have friends out in the real world and I mention that we had a keg party for my son's christening, they're a little concerned about me. I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm like, we roofed our house with a keg on the roof. I'm like, this is what you did. Have keg will travel. I mean, we used to put them in the back of our car, fill the trunk with ice, and you know the old cars had the speakers in the back, right? I mean, again, I'm dating myself here, but you know, they had, you know, so we would bring the keg up through the speaker hole, and we would just be a party on wheels. I mean, this is, you know, again, that was normal life for me. I would love to say that, you know, it stayed fun, but it didn't. You know, by the time I was 21, we were having our second child. We had, you know, been on again, off again. Life was, you know what I mean, was not good. You know, because, you know, when you drink like that, you know, things do not stay smooth. And unfortunately, you know, again, the brilliant idea was to get married. This is going to fix the problem. A man will trust a woman if they get married. Please, all laugh, because I know that's total BS. But that was my logic, that if I married him, he would now trust me. He would have to trust me, because I would be good now if I got married. Our wedding was a disaster. He was so drunk at the wedding that he was weaving, right? We left our wedding in separate limos, because I went with my friends and he went with his friends. We got thrown out of our own reception. You know, so this is a good start to a marriage, right? And at this point, like I said, I'm only 21 years old. And, you know, at this point, I have had countless incidents with the police, with car accidents, with, you know, I was that very nice girl that went out to have one drink and would be crawling up the stairs while my husband's standing at the door in his work uniform waiting to go to work, and I'm crawling up the stairs, you know, and I got no excuse for anything. You know, I went out to have one drink. As a matter of fact, I went out to go Christmas shopping for my kids. You know, I dropped my kids off on a Friday with my parents, and I came back on a Tuesday. I don't know. I mean, I thought I had it all together. I thought I was doing okay. And, you know, my marriage lasted a whopping, I know you're shocked, 3 years. And we got separated, and it was the first time that I admitted I was afraid of my husband. And because I grew up in a house where you did not acknowledge that. You stood up, you took it, and it was okay. But for whatever reason, in that moment, I acknowledged, you know, some things had happened, and I couldn't blame myself in that moment. And I told him he was an alcoholic, and he couldn't come home. And so he left, and he seat belted his beer in the front seat. And he packed like 3 pairs of pants, so I knew he wasn't coming home. Because if he didn't pack clothes, he was coming home. And you know, and I was like, that's what the problem was. The problem was him. Now, I completely forgot that at 19 years old, I sat in a doctor's office, and the doctor looked me right in the eye, and she said, I don't know what you're doing, but if you keep it up, you're not going to see 25. And I can promise you, at 19 years old, I looked at that doctor's eyes and I said, that's okay. I was completely okay at 19 to die by 25. And at 20 years old, I had a lovely woman I worked with give me a lovely Ann Landers article out of the newspaper on alcoholism and a list of AA meetings, which I was offended at. And I also thought, what kind of a stupid anonymous program posts in the newspaper? Right? I mean, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And so I made copies of this. I mailed it to, you know what I mean, my dad, my aunt. I gave a copy to my husband, right? You know what I mean? Because this letter was not for me. I was 20 years old. You know, but here I am. I'm 24. My marriage is over. And I think that he is just the problem. I got this. There's not a problem here. I can handle this. And unfortunately, when he left, there was no line in the sand anymore. There was nobody to compare to. There was nobody to be better than. There was just me and booze. And I am sorry to say that if there was a moral that could be put in the cupboard, if there was a line that could be crossed, if there was some wrong action that could be taken, I did it. You know, you don't need the details. You all have them. You have your own. That demoralizing behaviors. You know, the stuff that by the time I was 25, I couldn't even look myself in the eye. You know, there was nobody home. When I was 25, again, some things had happened. Things were really not good. My ex-husband was getting sober. He divorced me. I started the proceedings just to, you know, stick it to him, right? But you know what? He followed through. He divorced my ass. I was pissed. It was okay for me to start the proceedings, but how dare he divorce me? I was so good. You know, he was logging to take custody of our children. And, you know, again, 26 years ago in Massachusetts, they did not give custody to men. And I promise you, the judge said if she saw me again, I was losing. And I'd love for that to have made some kind of a emphasis or dent. And it didn't. Because I sat on my kitchen floor, and with everything in me, I wanted to not drink. I wanted to be a good mom to my boys. And I lost that battle. I got up and I drank. Every time. You know, I'd call my ex-husband every now and again, and, you know, he'd ask if I had enough. If I wanted to go to AA, he gave me a big book. I threw it at him. You know, I kept trying to be a victim in my own life, blaming other people, blaming situations. I wanted it to be about the trauma and the drama of my childhood. You know, if you had had my life, if what happened to me happened to you, and, you know, I got my son, he was 4, and I got him a camera, you know, one of those like 110 cameras, a little film, and it had Elmo on it. And I'm sitting there with my cup of coffee that has, you know what I mean, Jack in it and Bailey's, because I don't know about you, but Bailey's was not alcohol. That was cream. And I'm a good Irish girl, so Jack goes in every coffee. And I would have told you I didn't drink in the morning, just so you know, I didn't drink in the morning. But I'm sitting there with my cup of coffee, and this little boy, he tried to take a picture, and I promise you I couldn't smile for him. I couldn't. I had nothing for this child. And I had that picture, and I carried it in my big book for probably 4 years. Because when I tell you that I was dead, there was no one home. You know, you all know what that dead stare is. But when you have to look at your own child with that dead stare and you got nothing for them, nothing. He's 4. He's full of happiness, joy. That's all he wants is his mom to smile at him. And I got nothing to give him. It wasn't enough. It wasn't love for my kids. I couldn't stop. You know, so I thought I'd go to AA, you know, and I walked in and people were in these bright rooms, smiling, you know, talking. And I wanted nothing to do with you. And again, keep in mind, right, like, I've learned the words discretion, grace, right, like, you know, self-respect. But I looked like I was an extra in the Pretty Woman movie before she met Richard Gere, right? I dressed like Sluts R Us. I had morals to match, and I swore in between syllables. So if you ever hear my husband tell you that I should have come with a warning label, he is doing me nice, okay? I came in, I wanted nothing for what you people had to offer, nothing. I was way too young, and I compared myself right out the door. People talked about things that hadn't happened to me. And I had people, they were old and they were knitting and they were like, you know, I drank more than, you know, spilled more than you drank. And I'm like, I don't think so. I would like to have that conversation, you know, because ego is dangerous, you know, and as long as I think I got it, as long as I think I can do it, I'm already done. I'm already done. You've got nothing that you can share with me because I am a closed book. And so, you know, New Year's comes around, and I'm having a party at my house. My newest boy wonder is fist fighting with my father in the kitchen. Somebody else is on a call to Brazil, which was a nice phone bill, by the way. You know, I'm sitting on the couch with a joint in one hand because drugs have come right back because drinking is just not enough anymore. It's not getting it done. And I got a drink in the other hand, and I look at my friend and I say, I just don't know why this shit keeps happening. Right? And she says, I don't know, man, maybe you need to move again. And I'm thinking, she got something there. It's you know what, this house is a problem. And so, you know, I'm going to let my ex know that I'm going to move with my children. Like, that's going to happen. And we ended up having a conversation, and I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened, but, you know, he was showing up to pick up these kids. Now, when he left, my children were afraid of their father. And we're 2 years later, and they're waiting at the door to go with their father. They're afraid of me. Okay? He's changed. I mean, it's not like just the usual stuff, like, you know, that he showered and he's, you know what I mean, fully clothed and, like, you know, matching outfits here. But he's changed. You know, when you read in the book and you talk about, you know, that experience between Bill and Ebby, and there's a light in his eyes and something is different. He is rewired. He is on different footing. That was what he was. First of all, he didn't take my shit anymore. He didn't believe my bullshit, my lies, my all of it, right? And that was shocking to me because, I knew how to play this man. And he was done with me. 100% done with me. He didn't come in the house. He stood on the steps. You know? He wanted nothing. And he just kept saying, you know, if you want to get well, I'll talk to you. But until that point, we have nothing to say. Now, that might sound harsh to some of you, but I promise you, That's the real deal. Because otherwise he was talking to my disease and it was useless. And so one glorious Saturday night, right before my birthday, I thought it would be a grand idea to get drunk and swing by his apartment and just let him know who I've been for the last 2 years. I do not recommend this, people. Do not do that. Go to your ex-husband and give him information that he does not ever need to know about the woman that is the mother of his children. But I will tell you that that man, God at work in that man in this moment. Because all he said to me was, you know, it's okay. You don't have to be that. And if you really want to be done, I can give you a phone number to a woman. I was like, you want me to talk to a woman? No, thank you. But I took the number. And I drove home, tried to roll my truck, because, you know what I mean, this is the kind of decision making I had, right? Like, I bought a truck that had really bad safety ratings, right? Because that's what I did. I wanted to roll my truck. I looked at pillars every time. My idea of prayer was I took a handful of pills with a bottle of vodka every night and said, please, don't let me wake up. I can't do this anymore. I hurt. I hurt physically. My liver was enlarged. My kidneys were shutting down. I was jaundiced, and I was 26 years old. And I hurt. Mentally, I told you I was dead. There was nobody home anymore. I had nothing left. My friend circle was, you either wore colors or you were fresh out of jail, because you know what? If you weren't, we weren't talking. You know? And I got home that night. I don't know how. Couldn't seem to go over 40 miles an hour. I promise you that is not how I drove. I like Texas speed limits, by the way. I got home and I sat in my driveway and I just said, if there is a God, I can't do this anymore. So that idea of like your bottom, that prayer to God, whatever it is, my experience is not a big bush. It's not this big, glorious anything. It was just simple. I was done. And God knew that I was done in that moment. And I went to bed that night, and it was the first night that I didn't wake up and drink my NyQuil that was kept by the nightstand, because I just thought I had the chills every night. You know, and I didn't put anything in my coffee that next day. And I called that phone number that was still crumpled up in my pocket. And I called this lady, and I left her a message on her machine, because, you know, people had real phones then, you know, attached to the wall. And voice machines, real ones that you had to push the button on. And I left her a message, and I promise you, I thought I was so cool and collected on this message. This woman called me back like 30 minutes later asking if she needed to call the police or an ambulance. Right? And I was shocked. I was like, what are you talking about? I am good. She's like, oh, really? And so she started talking to me. And she talked about being a woman of honor and grace and dignity. And I laughed. I said, lady, you have no idea who you're talking to. And I promise you, you cannot bring a girl like me to those things. You cannot be where I've been. You cannot do what I've done. And you cannot, that's just not real. And that woman laughed at me. I promise, talk about piss me off. She laughed at me, and she said to me, that's okay. She said those things, because I proceeded to tell her a few of them just so she'd know how sick I was and how hopeless I was. And she said to me, those are the things that will make you uniquely qualified to work with another woman. Those are the things that will help you get sober, stay sober, and help somebody else in their journey. And I was like, lady, now I know you're crazy. And then she asked me, you know what I mean, like if I could go to a meeting, and I didn't know where there was a meeting, and then, you know what I mean, like everybody, you know, again, you always got the newspaper back then, like, you know, again, because I'm old. And, you know, so she's like had me, you know, get up the newspaper, and I'm looking through, and I was shocked, right? Like I knew where every bar was, right? Like every bar. Every packy, because again, we didn't have liquor stores, we had package stores, and bars, right? Like liquor was not sold anywhere but at the packy. And I knew where they all were. As a matter of fact, I got Christmas cards from the package stores, right? Like, I thought I had arrived. Like, I guess that's not a good thing, but I thought it was. Who knew? But there was a lot of meetings right around my house, and I proceeded to start telling her why I couldn't go. They were too close. Like, you know what I mean? Now, again, I'm the girl that drives into my yard, mows over my own mailbox, breaks into my house, climbs in a window, right? And there's a revolving door there, right? But God forbid I go to an AA meeting with somebody from my neighborhood, right? Like, oh, hell no, they might know me, right? I got thrown out of the local dive bar. I was speaking at a meeting back home one day, and I was like, yeah, you know what I mean? I used to drink at the Whaleback every night, and the Whaleback was this little hole in our bar that was like behind a junkyard, right? So when you think about the caliber of people there, right? And this guy looked at me afterwards, and he was like, I wouldn't even go in there. And I was like, oh my God, that was my home away from home. But, you know, so anyway, I talked to this lady, and I tell her, I'm like, I'm not going to be able to make it to a meeting until like Thursday, right? Because, you know what I mean, that's like a whole week away. And she says, I don't know if you're going to make it till then, but, you know, if that's the best you got, you know, give me a call. And she's, bye. And I'm like, that's how that works? Just bye? I would have liked to tell you that I stayed sober and, you know what I mean, like, but I didn't. I called my ex-husband, and I said, I need to go to this meeting. I'm like, but can you bring me? And he says, yeah. And so I got drunk and went to his house to go to AA. Don't recommend, but, you know, whatever. And then we walk into the church, and so the downstairs is the basement, and that's where Al-Anon is, and upstairs is the AA meeting, and it's very bright up there, and there's all these people, and I'm like, God love me. I says, you know what my problem is you. This man just took me to an AA meeting. He's giving me a number. He's right, going above and beyond. And I go, my problem is you. I'm going downstairs with all those people that hate you. That's where I need to be. And he says, wherever you can get well. And so I went downstairs to Al-Anon, and I proceeded to go to Al-Anon for a bit. And Al-Anon was wonderful. The adult children of alcoholics was really popular in the 90s. And so there was a lot of people in there, they called themselves double winners, right? And these were the people that I could identify with. Because these regular Al-Anon people, they were talking about, well, when my husband gets home and he pours himself a drink and that ice starts clinking in the glass, she's like, I just get so much anxiety. And I'm looking at her going, oh my God, that sound, I can breathe. For the first time, I can breathe. You crack open a beer and I'm like, oh, right? And she's talking about how hard it is, and I'm like, and they were so good to me. They let me stay, and they kept saying to me things like, you know, we recommend that you go to AA just to hear the other side. Like, maybe like 3 days a week, maybe. Now, that's not really what they tell people, but, you know, God loved them because they recognized who and what I was, right? So I started going to AA, and I don't know about you, but I read the steps off the wall. I sponsored myself because women were competition, and I wanted no part of you. And men were playthings, and I was told to stay away from them. And I would come late. I would leave early. You all held hands, and I was way all set with that. But about 60 days of, you know, off-the-wall sobriety and just not doing anything, I promised that sobriety became more painful than I remembered drinking to be. I could not breathe. I could not function. You talking, I just wanted to run you over with my car. If one more person told me to keep coming back, I was going to throat punch them. Right? I could not handle it. I needed relief from sobriety, and I don't know if any of you can identify with that, but just sitting in a seat and waiting for the miracle, boy, ain't gonna happen for a girl like me, because I can't do it. Step one has 2 parts, right? Alcohol is the first part. Abstinence is the solution, right? that second part, that little hyphen, which, by the way, I read as a and, right? You know what I mean? Like, and my life became unmanageable, so I blamed all of my unmanageability on my drinking. But it's not, it's a hyphen. It's a two-part proposition. The unmanageability, that's what I need a spiritual solution for, and that's the part that I could not grasp. I was trying to treat this disease because I drank too much and I got in trouble and I was going to lose my kids. Okay, so I was just trying to just not drink and hold on to my seat. And about 60 days in, I was done. I was done with all of you. I was going back to the doctors because I have a very colorful medical chart and I am not afraid to misuse it. I am not here to tell anybody they can't be on meds, shouldn't be on meds, but I'm going to tell you that I lied to every doctor out there, and the medications that I had were based on bullshit information. I'm not saying that my diagnoses aren't valid. I'm saying that the information was vastly exacerbated so that I could get a medication so that I could misuse it. Because I promise I never had anything that said crush and snort, take by the handful, right? Anything that said as needed was my favorite, because I as needed quite a bit. Right? So I'm leaving AA. I'm done with all of you, all of this. And I had a woman get between me and the door, and I'll tell you, she was a brave soul because I was not a nice girl. Like, if there was crazy going on my eyes, it was all about it. But she got between me and the door, and she asked me two very important questions that I was very angry at. But the first one was, are you an alcoholic? I was pissed, right? I'm like, what do you think I'm doing here? Why would I be in this crap? And she said, well, what do you think being an alcoholic is? And I was like, I drink too much, I get in trouble, and you know what? And that's it. And she laughed at me. No, that's not what being an alcoholic is. She says, tell me something. What happens when you start to drink? Can you stop and moderate? I'm like, moderate? I didn't even know what that word meant. Right? She says, can you start and stop abruptly? I'm like, yeah, if I got cuffs on. Right? And she says, all right, well, let's say you said you've been sober, right? She says, what happens when you don't drink? How you feeling? How you thinking? Are you thinking about drinking? Are you thinking about not drinking? You're thinking about when you're going to be able to drink, how much you're going to be able to drink, when you're going to be able to control it, right? I mean, like, we went through the whole, like, auctioneer, right? She got me down. And I'm dumbfounded because I'm just trying to treat this thing by not drinking. I don't need your spiritual crap. I don't need your God. And then she asked me the second question because I'm like, this stuff don't work. And she said, really? How long do you want to come to a 12-step program and not do the 12 steps? I said, what are you talking about? I read them. Right there, I read them. I said, no, 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 yes, no, no. Right? I attended your meetings. I read your 12 and 12 book, right? I knew enough to be dangerous. I knew enough to little slogan my way into a whole hell of a lot of trouble. But I had never actually applied anything, followed a single set of instructions, nothing. Talk about being, you know what I mean, like complacent. That was me. The only thing I had ever been consistent at was being inconsistent. I actually have paperwork that says that. I was consistently inconsistent. But it got me thinking, right? And I was like, I'll tell you what, I'm going to do this just to prove it don't work, right? So again, I don't care what your attitude is. I don't care if you think it ain't going to work. I promise you what it says is, rarely have we seen a person who thoroughly follows our path, okay? Doesn't mean pick and choose, doesn't mean at my pace, what I want. Thoroughly follows directions. I started sitting down with this woman. She started calling me on my crap. We were not friends. I promise you that. We were not friends. And first of all, we were not normally people that would mix because she was there with penny loafers, knitting in the meeting, and happy housewife. And I was sluts RS, and we met in public, right? And I thought we're meeting in public because, like, that's what you're supposed to do. She would not bring me home to her house. I was unfit for her family. I found that out later. But you know what? I was unfit for her family. I was unfit for my family. The difference was my family didn't know that I was unfit for them, but her family sure as shit did. She had a much higher level of expectation in her home. And you know, in this book where it talks about, you know, we look at those people and we laugh, and instead we should be wanting what they have. She's one of those people I laughed at. Like, look at that sorry say. She and those penny loafers knitting in the meeting. She got no life. Look at me, I'm all together. Right? I'm on my like 4th job of the year, right? It's like March. She made me do my 3rd step prayer in the middle of Dunkin' Donuts. I was like, you want me to do what? What? Yeah, we're gonna hold hands. I'm like, in public? Yes, and we're gonna say this prayer. I'm like, oh, I don't know about that. She said, you were gonna follow directions, right? You said that you were gonna prove me wrong. Prove me wrong. Right? This woman held me to the standard that I set. Thank God for that. Thank God for that. It was not easy. Early sobriety was not easy. I did not have that pink cloud. I promise I did not get here. I've never met anybody that did, by the way. I didn't get here on a winning streak. My life was in shambles. I'm paying MasterCard with Visa, Visa with Discover. I'm telling the electric company they can't shut me off because I got a baby in my house. My kids are 4 and 10. You know, I'm down at the gas company, right, using my mother's account to, you know, get gas in my house. I'm like, no, she said I could. Look, here's a note she wrote. I forged it. I did. You know, my car had unregistered, uninsured. I parked it in the backyard because I believed 100% that they could not repossess me until I was at least 4 months delinquent. Now, don't ask me where I got that information because it's not true. But I believed it, and so therefore it was true. My car had 3 different color fenders, right? Attached plates, right? Out-of-date sticker. We all know this deal, right? Like, that makes sense, right? We live this way. You know, the beer crisper. I didn't realize that was for fruits and vegetables. It was the beer crisper, you know, and the freezer was for hot damn and peach schnapps. You know, I learned in my 4-step, you know what I mean? I had to write one, and I had to get real. And it was painful. I don't know about you, but my sponsor was not nice. Not nice. She would not let me off the hook with anything. I like to use things like, well, maybe I did. And she's like, oh, no, we'll take that maybe out. You did. Okay? I like to say, I left my kids with my parents, and she said, no. You neglected, and you deserted your kids. Okay? I'm sorry, those words are harsh, but you know what? I need those words. I need the truth. It says I have to get to causes and conditions if I want to get well, and I cannot let myself off the hook. It says I need to be, you know, kind with others, but hard on me. You know, I did my fear inventory, which I promise you, I did not think I was afraid of anything. Come to find out, I was afraid of everything, right? I'm afraid of commitment, but I'm afraid of being alone, right? I am afraid of having money and success, but I am deathly afraid of poverty, right? I am afraid of your opinion of me. I am afraid that, you know, what you say about me will be true. I'm afraid that I can't be a good mom. I'm afraid that I don't know how to be in a relationship. I mean, everything. You know, spiders and snakes, you know what I mean? Those things, those are everybody is, right? You know, some of that stuff, you know, but I got to look at my fears, and I got to look at my conduct, and all I'll say about conduct is, you know, the book talks about in Bill's story that, you know, he was too drunk to get out of some of those scrapes, and unfortunately, as a woman, we don't have that same, you know, we just don't have that same. Unfortunately, you know, that doesn't work the same way. And but my conduct list, the good thing about it was I got to learn who I really had been, who I had harmed, how I had hurt other people, and how I behaved. But the best thing I got to come out of that was how to have a new conduct. to move forward differently. When I made that promise when I was still drinking, that I could be a woman of honor and dignity, that I could look the world in the eye, that I did not have to be what I had been. I promise you, I came out of that fourth step with a list of things, and they were not easy to uphold and stand by, but I came out of that fourth step with a list of things that I could move forward with. 6 and 7 were really, truly about, honestly, they were just about learning to live with those defects and take those different actions. My first sponsor said to me, whatever you think, do the exact opposite. Because your thinking sucks. She said, don't go into your head without adult supervision. You don't qualify, right? And so that's how I got started, right? And then with 8 and 9, and the 8th step, I had to look at all of those people that and I got to put them in. My sponsor gave me grace in this moment. I got to put everybody in this category of either yes, maybe, or no, right? So I started with the yeses, and I prayed to move those maybes to yes and those nos to maybes. And because I started with those yeses, those maybes became yeses. And because those maybes became yeses, those nos became maybes, became yeses. Amends aren't easy. It's not about I'm sorry. I was told flat out, you've overused that word. Now I'm not talking if I bump into somebody, oh, sorry, but if I'm standing before you to make an amends, I don't get that word. I don't. I regret the harm I did. I unjustly, when I did, and I had to lay it out there for them. When I did X, Y, and Z, you didn't deserve. I was wrong, right? I had to take ownership 100% of my side of the street. She said, I don't care if it is 99 and 1. You will take 100% of your 1%. I got to sit down with my ex-husband, and believe you me, that man knew this program, and he was not going to let me off the hook. Okay? But you know what? There are things that weren't in my fourth step because I didn't know them until I sat down for those amends. Because when I asked him if there was something that I didn't know that I needed to know, do you know that man had to look me in the eye and tell me that for 2 years when he was sober and I was not, that he feared for his life? Because his life insurance was in my name, and he was afraid that he was going to be worth more to me dead than alive. And I would love to tell all of you people that that's bullshit and that, he had no right to feel that way. But I promise you, the people I hung around with, the things that I was doing, and the levels of low that I was going, and where I came from, and the family I came from, and the access I had to things, he had every right to have that fear. Every right to have that fear. And all I could say to him was, you didn't deserve that. No one deserves that. I didn't get to defend myself. I didn't get to argue. I had to own that is what my drinking did to other people. It wasn't about getting drunk and making a mess. It wasn't about puking on the floor and hitting something with my car. Okay? It was what I made people think, feel, and fear. Okay? That's what I had to face. When I sat down with my brother and I did my amends, and he looked at me and he said, that's bullshit. You've said this before. And I promise you, I was like, no, I didn't. I promise I never took accountability here. I might have said I was sorry, right? But I didn't mean it. But I didn't get to say that. I didn't get to argue with him. I just said, I'm sorry you feel that way. And I had to go call my sponsor and be like, do you believe that asshole? Right? Because you know what? I bookended my amends. I talked to my sponsor and I prayed, and then I talked to my sponsor and we prayed. Okay? I don't do this program alone. I'm not supposed to. I don't have to. If you are, that's your choice. I don't recommend it. That's your choice. I don't do it alone. 5 years later, my brother showed up at my door because my sponsor said, you need to send him a card for every holiday, everything, and you call him and you never miss nothing, and you invite him to everything. And if he shows up late, you say, that's fine, your plate is kept warm in the microwave. And I was like, are you kidding me? 5 years later, that boy showed up at my door with a Mother's Day card in his hand, and he said, I wanted to make sure I dropped this off because if I mailed it, you wouldn't get it. That's when I knew I was forgiven. 5 years. Okay, there is damage that we do. I don't get forgiven in a minute just because I want it. I don't get the key to the building because I got sober. There is work to be done. I have to show up and show people. Because, when I was out there and I was drinking and I was running and I was doing what I was doing, I showed you what I was capable of, and I showed you how to treat me. I taught you how to treat me. I taught you how I was going to treat you. And if I'm going to be sober, and I'm going to call myself recovered, and I'm going to live differently, then I need to do that same thing. I have to show up and demonstrate these 12 steps. Because you know what? I might be the only big book someone ever sees. My ex-husband was the only big book I ever saw. Nobody in my house got sober. As a matter of fact, my parents thought I joined a cult. Okay? And, I got a lot of kickback. He was the only person I ever saw get sober. And, we got back together. God loved that man. Because the wreckage of my drinking did damage in his world for a very long time. See, I was able to be removed from it, right? Because I was stepped back. But, we don't just hurt ourselves. We hurt other people. And we leave other people to deal with the wreckage of our mess. Being in a relationship, any relationship, takes work. I can't tell you how many 4 steps I've written. Can't tell you how many times my husband's been on that list. But every time, my job has always been to find me, for me to change, for me to be different. The reason we're still together today is because of other people, because we always had our respective corners to go back to. We work the same program, but we work them separately. He does not sponsor me, I do not sponsor him, but we can talk about the fundamentals. But the best thing that my sponsor ever did for me was she made me sponsor. I was not ready. I did not want to. I did not really like people. But she said that if I really, truly, truly wanted to keep it, if I really, truly wanted to continue to grow, I needed to give it back. I needed to put my hand out. And I said, yeah, but I don't really, look at me, I'm still a hot mess. And she said, it doesn't matter. You're a hot mess of staying sober. She says, you don't have to have it together. What you have to have is a book in hand with the directions. Because I'm not going to make anything up for you. It's amazing. I don't got to rewrite it. The directions are here. I read this book with you, sharing my experience while you have your own. Right? What you do or don't do does not affect my sobriety. It might bother me, it might hurt my feelings. It does not affect my sobriety. What I do will affect my sobriety. What I don't do will affect my sobriety. I still start my day. I don't ask to be kept away from a drink or a drug. That was not the directions I was given. If you do, okay, have that. But you know what? Go to the gas station, it's right there, right? Turn on TV, it's right there, right? I don't care where you go, it's there, right? So I'm not going to be kept away from it. But what I do ask for is to be divorced from selfish, self-seeking, dishonest, and fear, because that is what runs my life. Okay? 1 day sober, 2 days sober, 26 years sober. Okay? That's what runs my life. I ask for that. During the course of my day, I promise you I do pause when agitated or doubtful. Right? Which means when I'm stirred up, good or bad. Right? Do I do it perfectly? Hell no. Do I still make a mess? Yes. That's why I've written several 4 steps. And at the end of my day, I do a review. Am I perfect with it? No, right? But I do that checklist. Where was I selfish? Where was I? Do I owe an amends? Because if I did any of those things and I didn't correct it, I owe that. And so the next morning when I'm starting my day, that should be in my plans for the day. And so by doing those things, by sponsoring other people is what keeps it fresh. It's what keeps me doing. Because if I'm asking you to do it, I'm going to be doing it. Because, if I'm asking you about it, I'm going to be sharing mine with you. Because we're going to be doing this together. Right? I can't tell you how many times the women that I have sponsored have saved my life. When things have been bad, when things have been, because again, let's face it, we're so self-absorbed. When it's bad, it's, oh my God, it's never been this bad. My life is over. It's the worst it's ever been. But then I sit down across from somebody new, and I see that emptiness, and I see that pain. And you know what? As bad as my day is, I don't have that today. And I remember what I've come through. I remember what I've overcome. Do you think drinking is hard? Stay sober. Right? Deal with life on life's terms. Face it as it comes. That's hard. When I'm supposed to be going home for a family vacation and I get a call that my son is in a coma because he got in a car accident drinking, that's hard. Okay? When I got to go to that same hospital and I haven't talked to my parents in 10 years, and my father's throwing a fit in the hospital trying to get me thrown out, that's hard. But when that same boy gets out of the hospital and says, can I come home to recuperate? Okay? That is success. That is God. He still drinks. He's had several other accidents. His best friend died in his arms last year. I hold a seat for him and I love him. He knows about this program and he knows it works. He just says, Mom, I'm just not there yet. I said, okay. And I call somebody and I cry. Because I've almost lost him several times and it's not enough for him. Okay? Don't tell me that drinking is hard. Stay sober, because that shit is hard. But my home is a safe, well-lit place. My daughter is at my house this weekend. She had plans to go to Arkansas with friends. They got in a fight. Things went south, and she called me up and said, crying, and said, can I come home? I just want to be home for the weekend where I can just be okay. I don't know about you, but I was not calling my family. The fact that my 23-year-old daughter can call me up and say, can I come home? That is everything. But I learned to be there for her by being there for the women that I sponsor. When I had a girl that I sponsor called me because her mother OD'd and she found her dead on the floor and she didn't know what to do. I told her, I said, call 911, and I'm on my way. And I sat with her while they body bagged her mother. And God works in funny ways, because up the stairs comes her father, who I don't know is her father, because they have different last names. And she says, my dad is here to pick up my brother, because he was only 12. And I look up. And her father is my 7th grade in-school suspension teacher that I blackmailed to get passed out of the district. And I'm like, oh my God, I owe this man an amends. And I got to talk to him. And do you know, he hugged me and he said, I don't care. I can't believe that you're here holding my daughter's hand. If you needed to do that to be here today, it was worth it. There is opportunity in life that is absolutely wonderful to be a part of. It's not a free ride. You have to work. It's not about what you want. It's not about what you need. It is absolutely 100% what you are willing to do. I always said I was willing, and my sponsor said, you be wishing. Willingness means prompted to act. So I'm sorry, if you are not taking action, you are full of shit. Sorry. I don't come from Texas. I'm not soft and fluffy. No, you know what? when I got sober, you know what I mean? Like, I hear it around here and again, whatever, it is what it is. You know, they say that the new person is the most important person in the meeting, and I don't believe that. I think we need new people. I do. But they are not the most important person in this meeting, because you know what? The new person is so full of self, then that ego is going to get them killed. Okay? When I came in, they told me to sit down and shut up. They said, you have nothing to offer anybody, because if your life was so good, you never would have walked through these doors. They said, you know how to make a mess. Let us teach you how to clean it up. If those people weren't there when I came, I never would have come back. I hated the well-lit rooms. I hated the laughter. I hated the people holding hands. And I promise you, when people said they were a grateful alcoholic, we were fighting in the parking lot. Okay? Today, I am absolutely 100% grateful that I am an alcoholic, because it gave me that opportunity. When I sat down with this book, people talk about the promises. I know you guys read them a lot here, but in the doctor's opinion, you know what I mean, there's a promise that says that we can recreate our lives. We're not even at page 1 yet. And that's the promise. That's the promise that got me. Because I don't know about you, but when I got here, there was nothing I wanted from my life. Nothing I was bringing to the table. Nothing I was doing, saying, anything that was of any value. And it's not because I wasn't educated, and it's not because I couldn't have a job. You know, page 52 talks about the bedevilments, and you know what? Those are your disease. It says that we have problems with personal relationships. How's your personal relationships? Because I'll tell you how mine were. They sucked. Nobody liked me, and I didn't like anybody, right? I'm losing custody of my kids, and I'm going to jail, so that's not going well, right? It says problems making a living. It doesn't say whether or not you have a job. I made $600 a week myself. I scalped my ex-husband and was collecting $300 a week from his paycheck. My mortgage was $600 a month, and I lost my house. That math don't work. I want you to know that I'm in finance, okay? It's a good place for me to be. But that math doesn't math, right? That's problems making a living. Pray to misery and depression. Like I said, I got a colorful medical chart, and I will play all day with it, right? Full of fear, feelings of uselessness, right? That's what I came in here with. These steps, these women, they have given me a life second to none. Absolutely second to none. So I am a grateful alcoholic. Thanks for having me.